The moment Adrian Vale's tires blew out on that forgotten stretch of highway, he had no idea his past was waiting inside a roadside diner that smelled like burnt dreams and old regrets. The woman refilling coffee, tired eyes, cautious smile, was someone he thought he'd lost forever. She'd once saved him when he had nothing. Now he had everything. And she had this, a grease-stained apron. A life that seemed too small for someone who used to believe the world could be bigger. He didn't plan to stop, didn't plan to remember, didn't plan to realize that some debts can never be repaid, only returned. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. Hit that like button and stick around, because what happens next will break you in the best way possible. The tire didn't just blow, it exploded. Adrian felt the steering wheel jerk hard to the right, heard the violent thump, thump, thump of shredded rubber against asphalt, and for the first time in years, he wasn't in control. His jaw tightened. The Aston Martin fishtailed once before he muscled it onto the shoulder, dust kicking up in angry clouds around the vehicle. He sat there for a moment, hands still gripped white-knuckle tight on the wheel, heart hammering harder than it should have been. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not today. Not on this route. He had a meeting in Phoenix in 4 hours, a conference call in 2, and a reputation for being the kind of man who never arrived late. But here he was, middle of nowhere, Arizona heat already pressing through the tinted windows like a hand on his chest. He pulled out his phone. No signal. Of course, Adrian exhaled slowly, forcing his shoulders to drop, his breathing to steady. He climbed out of the car, stood in the shimmering heat, and surveyed the damage. The rear tire was gone, completely shredded, black ribbons of rubber scattered across the gravel like the aftermath of something violent. He glanced up the road. Nothing but cracked pavement and desert stretching out in every direction. Then he looked back the way he'd come. Half a mile down, barely visible through the heat shimmer, was a building. Low, flat, sun-bleached to the point of looking like it might crumble if you leaned on it too hard. A faded sign hung crooked above the door. Ruthie's Diner. Open. Adrian stared at it. He could call for a tow. Wait in the air-conditioned car. Handle this the way he handled everything else, efficiently, without deviation. But something about the sight of that diner pulled at him in a way he couldn't name. He grabbed his jacket from the passenger seat, locked the car, and started walking. The heat was brutal. By the time he reached the diner, his shirt was sticking to his back, his throat dry. He pushed through the door, and a small bell chimed overhead, cheerful and out of place. Inside it was cooler. Not by much, but enough. The air smelled like burnt coffee, old grease, and something faintly sweet that might have been pie or might have been cleaning solution. The floors were scuffed linoleum, the booths cracked vinyl patched with duct tape. A ceiling fan turned lazily overhead, doing almost nothing. There were 3 customers. An older man in a trucker's cap sat at the counter, staring into his coffee like it held answers. A young couple occupied a booth near the back, whispering to each other in that way people do when they're either in love or planning something stupid. Maybe both. And behind the counter, wiping down the coffee station with slow, practiced movements, was a woman. Adrian's breath caught. She didn't notice him at first. She was focused on her task, head down, shoulders slightly hunched in a way that made her seem smaller than she probably was. Dark hair pulled back into a ponytail that had seen better days. A stained apron tied around her waist. She moved like someone who'd done this 1,000 times and would do it 1,000 more without expecting anything to change. But it was her face that stopped him cold. Older. Tired. Lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before, but unmistakable. Clara Hayes. He hadn't thought about her in years. Hadn't let himself. But standing here now, watching her move through this forgotten place like a ghost of someone she used to be, the memories came flooding back with a force that nearly knocked him sideways. Cracked apartment steps. Summer nights when the heat made it impossible to stay inside. Her sitting beside him, knees pulled to her chest, talking about the future like it was something they could actually touch. "You're going to do something big, Adrian. I can feel it." He'd believed her. Back when he had nothing. No money, no plan, no reason to think the world would ever be anything but small and suffocating, she'd believed in him. And somehow, that had been enough. But then life happened. He got a scholarship. moved away, climbed, built, became the kind of person who didn't look back because looking back felt like falling. And Clara? Clara had stayed. He didn't know that for sure, didn't know anything about what had happened to her after he left. But standing here now, watching her wipe down a counter in a place that looked like hope came to die, he felt something twist hard in his chest. She glanced up. Their eyes met. For a moment, nothing happened. She looked at him the way waitresses look at customers. Polite, distant, already preparing to ask what he wanted to drink. But then something flickered across her face. A pause. A tilt of her head. Recognition. Her hand froze mid-wipe. The cloth slipped from her fingers, landing on the counter with a soft thump. "Adrian?" Her voice was barely a whisper. He didn't trust himself to speak, so he just nodded. She stared at him, really stared, like she was trying to reconcile the man standing in front of her. Tailored clothes, expensive watch, the kind of presence that came with money and power, with the kid she used to know. The one who wore the same jeans 3 days in a row because they were the only pair that fit. "Oh my God." She pressed a hand to her mouth, eyes wide. "It's really you." "Yeah." His voice came out rougher than he intended. "It's me." For a long moment, neither of them moved. The diner continued around them, coffee percolating, the couple in the back laughing softly, the trucker flipping a page of his newspaper. But between Adrian and Clara, the world had gone very, very still. She recovered first, dropped her hand, forced a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Wow, I didn't expect to ever see you again." She let out a breath that might have been a laugh. "What are you doing here?" "Flat tire." He gestured vaguely toward the road. "Car's about half a mile back." "Oh." She nodded, like that explained everything. Maybe it did. "Do you need to call someone? We've got a phone in the back." "It's fine. I'll handle it." He paused. "How are you, Clara?" The question hung between them, heavier than it should have been. She looked away, picked up the cloth again, started wiping the counter even though it was already clean. "I'm good." "Yeah, good." She wasn't. He could see it in the way she wouldn't meet his eyes, the way her hands moved just a little too fast, like she needed to stay busy or she might fall apart. "You work here?" he asked. "Yeah, 5 years now." She said it casually, but there was something underneath, resignation, maybe, or shame. "It's not much, but it pays the bills." 5 years. Adrian did the math. She would have been 25 when she started. College-aged. She talked about going to school back then. Studying architecture, he thought. Or maybe engineering, something big, something that matched the size of her dreams. "You ever finish school?" The question came out before he could stop it. Her hands stilled. She didn't look at him. "No." One word. Flat. Final. "Why not?" She finally met his eyes, and what he saw there made his chest ache. "Life happened, Adrian." Before he could respond, a voice barked from the kitchen. "Clara, order up." She flinched, just slightly, but he saw it. "I should—" She gestured toward the window where a plate sat waiting. "Do you want something? Coffee?" "Yeah, coffee's fine." She nodded, grabbed a mug, filled it without looking at him. Her hands were shaking just a little. She set the cup down in front of him, and for a second, their fingers almost touched. She pulled back quickly. "I'll be right back." She disappeared into the kitchen, and Adrian sat there, staring at the coffee he didn't want, feeling like he'd just stumbled into a version of the past he wasn't prepared to face. She didn't come back right away. Adrian watched her through the kitchen window, moving between tables, refilling drinks, taking orders with a practiced efficiency that spoke of years doing this exact routine. She smiled at the customers, laughed at something the trucker said, but it was all surface. He could see it now. The way she held herself at a distance, the way she never quite relaxed. She was performing, and she was exhausted. When she finally returned, she slid into the booth across from him without asking if he minded. She didn't have a drink, didn't have anything. Just sat there, hands folded on the table, looking at him like she still couldn't quite believe he was real. "So?" Her voice was softer now, less guarded. "You did it." "Did what?" "Something big." A faint smile tugged at her lips. "I knew you would." He didn't know what to say to that. Didn't know how to explain that yes, he'd built an empire. made more money than he'd ever dreamed of, become the kind of person people wrote articles about. But sitting here, looking at her, none of it felt like enough. "What about you?" he asked quietly. She shrugged. "Not much to tell." "I don't believe that." She looked away, out the window, at the empty road and the endless desert beyond. "My mom got sick." Her voice was flat, matter of fact. "I dropped out to take care of her. She died 2 years later. By then, I couldn't afford to go back, so I didn't." Adrian felt something cold settle in his stomach. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. It was a long time ago." But the way she said it, like she'd told herself that so many times it had stopped meaning anything, told him it wasn't. "Not really." "You got married," he said, noticing the pale line on her ring finger where a band used to be. Her jaw tightened. "Yeah, that didn't work out either." "What happened?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "He left. Found someone younger. Someone who didn't come with hospital bills and a dead-end job." She shook her head. "I don't blame him. I wasn't who he thought I'd be." Adrian wanted to reach across the table, wanted to tell her she was wrong, but he didn't, because he didn't know if he had the right. "You deserve better," he said instead. She met his eyes, held his gaze for a long moment. "Maybe, but I don't think life cares much about what we deserve." The words hit harder than they should have. They sat in silence after that, not uncomfortable exactly, but heavy, like the weight of everything unsaid was pressing down on both of them. Finally, Clara glanced at the clock on the wall and stood. "I should get back to work. Ruthie gets cranky if I take too long on breaks." Adrian stood too. "When do you get off?" She hesitated. 8? "Why?" "I'd like to talk more, if you're okay with that." She studied him for a long moment, like she was trying to figure out if this was real or some kind of cruel trick the universe was playing on her. "Okay," she said finally. "I'll meet you outside." Adrian spent the next 3 hours in that diner. He nursed 2 more cups of coffee he didn't drink, made a few calls on the spotty Wi-Fi, watched Clara move through her shift with that same quiet efficiency, never stopping, never slowing down. And he noticed things. The way she avoided eye contact with the man in the kitchen, Ruthie's husband, he guessed. The way her smile faltered when she thought no one was looking. The way she carried herself like someone who'd learned not to take up too much space. This wasn't the girl he remembered. That girl had been bright, full of ideas. She used to talk so fast when she got excited that he'd have to tell her to slow down so he could keep up. She used to believe in things. This woman looked like she'd stopped believing a long time ago. When 8 o'clock finally came, Adrian was waiting outside. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that felt too beautiful for a place like this. The heat had mellowed into something almost bearable. He leaned against the side of the building, hands in his pockets, and waited. The door opened. Clara stepped out, still in her uniform, apron gone. She looked smaller out here, more fragile. She saw him and stopped. "You're still here." "I said I would be." She nodded slowly, walked over to him. For a moment they just stood there, not quite sure what to do with themselves. "There's a bench around back," she said finally. "It's not much, but it's quiet." He followed her around the building to a small wooden bench that had definitely seen better days. They sat, and for a while neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't awkward. It was the kind of silence that happens between people who used to know each other well enough that words weren't always necessary. But eventually, Adrian broke it. "Tell me the truth, Clara." She turned to look at him. "About what?" "About how you ended up here." She was quiet for a long time. So long that he thought maybe she wouldn't answer. But then she did. And once she started, she didn't stop. She told him about her mother's diagnosis, about dropping out of school in her second year because someone had to be there, and her father had left when she was 12, and there was no one else. She told him about the hospital bills that piled up faster than she could pay them, about selling everything they had just to keep the lights on. She told him about meeting Daniel, about thinking maybe, just maybe, someone could love her even when she came with baggage. About the wedding that was small and quiet because they couldn't afford anything else. About the 2 years they spent trying to make it work before he told her he couldn't do it anymore. She told him about the debt he left her with, the apartment she lost, the job at the diner that was supposed to be temporary but somehow became permanent. She told him everything, and Adrian listened. He didn't interrupt, didn't try to fix it, just listened. When she finally stopped talking, her voice was hoarse, and there were tears in her eyes that she refused to let fall. "I'm sorry," she said, wiping at her face. "I don't know why I just dumped all of that on you." "Don't apologize. It's just, I haven't talked about this stuff in a long time. And seeing you—" She shook her head. "It reminded me of who I used to be, before everything fell apart." Adrian turned to face her fully. "You didn't fall apart, Clara. You survived." She laughed bitterly. "Surviving isn't the same as living." "No, but it's a hell of a lot harder." She looked at him then, really looked at him. And for the first time since he'd walked into that diner, he saw a flicker of something in her eyes that wasn't exhaustion or resignation. It was hope, small, fragile, but there. "Why are you here, Adrian?" she asked softly. "Really?" He thought about that, about the blown tire and the detour and the strange pull that had led him through that door. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I'm glad I am." She held his gaze for a moment longer. Then she looked away, out at the desert stretching endlessly in every direction. "I used to think I'd get out of places like this," she said quietly. "I used to think I'd do something that mattered." "You still can." She shook her head. "I'm 30 years old, Adrian. I've got nothing. No degree, no savings, no plan. I'm not that girl anymore." "Maybe not, but you're still you." She didn't respond, just sat there staring out at the horizon like she was searching for something she'd lost a long time ago. Adrian stood, pulled a business card from his wallet, and set it on the bench beside her. "That's my number. If you ever need anything, and I mean anything, you call me." She picked up the card, stared at it like it was something precious and terrifying all at once. "I can't ask you for help, Adrian." "I'm not asking you to ask. I'm telling you it's there if you want it." He started to walk away. Got a few steps before her voice stopped him. "Adrian?" He turned. She was still sitting on that bench, card clutched in her hand, looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Thank you," she said. "For listening." He nodded. "Anytime." And then he walked back to his car, called for a tow, and spent the next hour sitting in the dark, thinking about the girl who'd once believed in him, and wondering if he could return the favor. Because one thing was clear, Clara Hayes deserved more than this, and whether she believed it or not, he was going to make damn sure she got it. The tow truck arrived 40 minutes later, headlights cutting through the dark like something out of a dream Adrian didn't want to wake from. He stood beside his car, business card still warm in his pocket, where Clara had handed it back to him just before he'd left the diner. She'd pressed it into his palm with trembling fingers and said, "I can't keep this. It wouldn't be right." He'd closed her hand around it. "Keep it anyway." Now, watching the driver hook up his Aston Martin, Adrian couldn't stop replaying the conversation. The way her voice had cracked when she talked about her mother. The way she'd looked at the desert like it was a prison she'd stopped trying to escape. "You want to ride into town?" the driver asked, a middle-aged guy with grease under his nails and a Diamondbacks cap pulled low. "Yeah, thanks." Adrian climbed into the cab and they drove in silence for the first few miles. He stared out the window at the darkness, mind elsewhere. "You okay, man?" the driver asked eventually. "You look like somebody died." "No, just ran into someone I used to know." The driver nodded like that explained everything. "That'll do it. This stretch of highway's got a way of bringing back ghosts." Adrian didn't respond. Because the man wasn't wrong. 3 days later, Adrian was back in Phoenix, sitting in his corner office on the 20th floor of a building he owned, staring at his laptop screen without really seeing it. His assistant had rescheduled the meeting he'd missed. The client hadn't been happy, but they'd deal with it. They always did. When you had the kind of money Adrian had, people forgave delays. But he couldn't focus. Every time he tried to read an email or review a contract, his mind drifted back to that diner, to Clara's tired eyes and the way she'd apologized for taking up his time. Like her pain was somehow an inconvenience. He'd built an empire on focus, on never letting emotion cloud judgment. But this felt different. His phone buzzed, a text from Marcus, his business partner and the closest thing he had to a friend. "Lunch? Need to talk about the Scottsdale deal." Adrian typed back, "Can't today. Handle it without me." The response came fast. "You never skip meetings. You dying or something?" Adrian almost smiled. "Not yet." He set the phone down and leaned back in his chair. Outside, the city stretched out below him, glass and steel and ambition. He'd clawed his way here from nothing, no family money, no connections, just stubbornness and a refusal to stay small. And Clara had been there at the beginning. She'd believed in him when he didn't believe in himself. He owed her. The thought had been circling his brain for 3 days now, relentless as a vulture. He owed her. Not money. Money was easy. He owed her a chance. The same kind of chance she'd given him all those years ago when she sat on those apartment steps and told him he could be more than his circumstances. He picked up his phone again, opened a new contact, stared at the empty fields. He didn't have her number, didn't even know if she had a cell phone, but he had the diner's number. He'd looked it up the night he got back. His finger hovered over the screen. This was stupid. She'd made it clear she didn't want help. Handing back his card had been a message, a polite refusal. He should respect that, let her be. But then he thought about the way her hands had shaken when she talked about her ex-husband. The way she'd said surviving isn't the same as living, like it was a truth she'd carved into her bones. He dialed. It rang 4 times before someone picked up. Ruthie's Diner. A woman's voice, older, sharp. "Hi, I'm looking for Clara Hayes. Is she working today?" A pause. "Who's asking?" "An old friend. I was in a few days ago." "She don't need old friends calling her at work." The line went dead. Adrian stared at his phone. Then he laughed, short and humorless. Of course. Nothing about this was going to be easy. He tried a different approach. 2 hours later, he was in his car again, headed west out of Phoenix. He told himself he was just driving, clearing his head. But when he took the exit toward Yuma, he stopped pretending. The diner looked exactly the same. Sun-bleached, half forgotten, the kind of place people drove past without noticing. He parked out front and sat there for a minute, trying to figure out what the hell he was doing. This wasn't his world anymore. He didn't belong in places like this. Hadn't for years. But Clara did. And that was the problem. He pushed through the door, same bell, same smell, same cheap coffee and worn-out dreams. Clara was at the counter pouring coffee for a guy in a construction vest. She glanced up when the bell chimed, and when she saw Adrian, she froze. The coffee kept pouring. It overflowed the cup, spilled across the counter. The construction worker yelped and jerked back. "Jesus, Clara!" She snapped out of it, grabbed a rag, started mopping up the mess. I'm so sorry." Adrian stayed by the door, hands in his pockets, suddenly feeling like maybe this was a mistake. But Clara finished cleaning up, muttered another apology to the construction worker, and then walked over. She stopped a few feet away, arms crossed, expression unreadable. "What are you doing here?" "I wanted to check on you." "I'm fine." "You don't look fine." Her jaw tightened. "Adrian, I can't do this right now. I'm working." "When do you get off?" "Why?" "Because I want to talk to you." "We already talked." "Not about what I came here to say." She stared at him. He could see the conflict in her eyes. Part of her wanted to tell him to leave, and part of her was curious. Maybe even hopeful. 8 o'clock, she said finally. "Same as last time." "I'll be outside." She nodded, then turned and walked back to the counter without another word. Adrian left before he could second-guess himself. When Clara stepped out of the diner that night, Adrian was leaning against a rented SUV. He'd returned the Aston Martin to Phoenix and picked up something less conspicuous. She saw him and hesitated, like she was still deciding whether to go through with this. But then she walked over. "You drove all the way out here just to talk?" "Yeah." She shook her head. "You're insane." "Probably." She almost smiled. "Almost. So what's this about?" "Get in. I'll tell you on the way." "On the way where?" "Somewhere that isn't here." She looked at the SUV, then back at him. "Adrian, I don't... Just trust me. Please." That word, please, seemed to catch her off guard. She studied him for a long moment, then sighed. "Fine. But if you're planning to murder me and dump my body in the desert, at least make it quick." Adrian opened the passenger door. Noted. They drove in silence for the first 10 minutes. Claire kept her eyes on the road, hands folded in her lap, posture stiff. Adrian could feel the tension radiating off her in waves. "Where are we going?" she asked finally. "Phoenix." Her head whipped toward him. "What? Adrian, I can't just—" "Relax. I'm bringing you back tonight. I just need you to see something." "See what?" "You'll know when we get there." She didn't look happy, but she didn't argue. Just turned back to the window and watched the desert roll past in the dark. They didn't talk much after that. Adrian tried a few times, asked her about work, about how she'd been since they last spoke, but her answers were short, guarded. So eventually he stopped trying and just drove. An hour and a half later, they pulled into Phoenix. The city lights glowed against the night sky, bright and endless. Clara stared out at them like she was seeing something foreign. "When's the last time you were here?" Adrian asked. 5 years? Maybe 6. You used to talk about moving here. You remember? She didn't answer. He drove through downtown, past the high-rises and the expensive restaurants, until he reached a quieter neighborhood on the north side. Tree-lined streets. Nice houses. The kind of place where people raised families and didn't worry about hospital bills. He pulled up in front of a mid-sized building, 3 stories, brick exterior, well-maintained. A sign out front read Sunset Ridge Apartments. Clara looked at it, then at him. "What is this?" "One of my properties. I own about a dozen apartment complexes around the city. This one's been doing well. Steady tenants, low turnover, but I need someone to manage it." Her eyes narrowed. "Adrian, the last manager quit 2 months ago. Took a job in California. I've been handling it myself, but I don't have the time. I need someone who's organized, responsible, good with people." "And you think that's me?" "I know it is." She shook her head, already pulling away. "I don't know anything about property management." "You'd learn. I'd train you." "Adrian, this is—" "It comes with an apartment, free rent, salaries $45,000 a year to start, with bonuses based on occupancy rates, health insurance, dental, 2 weeks paid vacation." Clara went very still. "Why?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Because you're wasting your life in that diner." "That's not your call to make." "You're right. It's not. But I'm making the offer anyway." She turned to look at him, and there was something in her eyes he couldn't quite name. Anger, maybe. Or fear. "You feel sorry for me?" "No." "Then what is this?" Adrian took a breath, chose his words carefully. "You gave me something once, when I had nothing and no reason to believe things would get better. You sat next to me and told me I was going to do something big. You made me believe it, and because of that, I did. That was different. It wasn't. You gave me a chance, Clara. I'm trying to return the favor." She stared at him for a long moment, then she laughed, sharp and bitter. "You think this evens the score? You think giving me a job makes us square?" "I don't care about being square. I care about you not spending the rest of your life in a place that's killing you." "You don't know anything about my life." "I know enough." "No, you don't." Her voice rose. "You don't know what it's like to watch someone you love waste away because you can't afford the treatments. You don't know what it's like to bury them and then realize you gave up everything for nothing. You don't know what it's like to wake up every day in a town that feels like a grave and wonder why the hell you're still here." Her voice cracked on the last word. She turned away, pressing a hand to her mouth, trying to hold it together. Adrian didn't say anything, just sat there, letting her have the moment. When she finally spoke again, her voice was quieter, steadier. "I can't take this job, Adrian." "Why not?" "Because I'll fail, and then you'll regret offering it." "You won't fail. You don't know that." "Yes, I do." She turned to look at him again, eyes wet but defiant. "How?" "Because I know you." "You knew me a long time ago. I'm not that person anymore." Adrian shook his head. "You're exactly that person. You've just forgotten." She didn't respond, just stared at him like she was trying to figure out if he was lying or delusional. Finally, she opened the door. "Take me back." "Clara, please, just take me back." He wanted to argue, wanted to grab her by the shoulders and shake her until she saw what he saw, that she was capable of so much more than this. But he didn't. Because pushing her wouldn't work. She'd been pushed enough. So he drove her back. They didn't talk the whole way. Clara kept her face turned to the window, and Adrian kept his eyes on the road, jaw tight, mind racing. When they pulled up outside the diner, she reached for the door handle but didn't open it. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for the offer. It was kind, but I can't. The offer stands. If you change your mind, I won't." She got out and walked toward her car, a beat-up Honda that looked like it was one breakdown away from the junkyard. Adrian watched her go, hands gripping the steering wheel hard enough to hurt. This wasn't over. The next morning, Clara woke up to find an envelope slipped under her apartment door. She stared at it for a long moment before picking it up. Inside was a single piece of paper. A contract. Property manager position. Sunset Ridge Apartments. Salary, benefits, start date. Everything laid out in black and white, and at the bottom, a handwritten note. "You don't have to decide today, or tomorrow. But when you're ready, call me." Clara sat on the edge of her bed, contract in hand, and for the first time in years, she let herself cry. Not because she was sad, not because she was angry, but because someone still believed she could be more. And she didn't know what the hell to do with that. The following week crawled by in a haze. Clara went through the motions at the diner, pouring coffee, taking orders, wiping down tables, but her mind was elsewhere. The contract sat on her kitchen counter, untouched but impossible to ignore. Every time she walked past it, she felt a pull, a whisper of something she'd buried years ago. What if? She hated that whisper, because what if led to hope, and hope led to disappointment. She'd learned that the hard way. But the whisper wouldn't shut up. On Thursday, during her lunch break, she pulled out her phone and stared at Adrian's number. He'd written it on the contract, not his office line, his personal cell, like he actually wanted her to call. Her thumb hovered over the screen. She put the phone down, picked it up again, put it down. "You gonna actually call someone or just stare at that thing all day?" Clara looked up. Ruthie was standing in the doorway to the kitchen, arms crossed, expression somewhere between amused and concerned. She was in her 60s, sharp-eyed and sharp-tongued, the kind of woman who'd been running this place since before Clara was born. "I'm not staring at it," Clara said. "Sure you're not." Ruthie walked over, sat down across from her. "You've been off all week. What's going on?" Clara hesitated. She and Ruthie weren't exactly close. Ruthie didn't do close. But the woman had given her a job when no one else would, and that counted for something. "Someone offered me a job," Clara admitted. Ruthie raised an eyebrow. "Better than this one, I'm guessing." "Yeah. So what's the problem?" "I don't know if I can do it." Ruthie snorted. "That's the stupidest thing I've heard all week, and I had a guy try to pay for pie with a scratch-off ticket yesterday." Clara almost smiled. "It's more complicated than that." "No, it's not. Either you want the job or you don't. It's not about wanting it. Then what's it about?" Clara looked down at her phone. "It's about not screwing it up." Ruthie was quiet for a moment, then she leaned back in her chair, studying Clara with those sharp eyes. "You know what your problem is? I'm sure you're about to tell me. You think too small. Always have. You come in here every day, do your job, keep your head down, don't ask for anything. And you think that's noble or something, but it's not. It's just scared." The words hit harder than they should have. "I'm not scared," Clara said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Yeah, you are. You're scared you're going to try and fail, so you don't try at all. And you know what? That's your choice. But don't pretend it's because you're not good enough. You're plenty good enough. You're just too chicken shit to admit it." Clara stared at her, stunned. Ruthie stood up, brushed off her apron. "Take the job, kid. Or don't. But stop wasting time pretending you don't want it." She walked back into the kitchen, leaving Clara sitting there, heart pounding, something hot and unfamiliar rising in her chest. It felt like anger, or maybe courage. She wasn't sure there was a difference anymore. That night, Clara sat in her apartment, a cramped studio that smelled faintly of mold and someone else's cooking, and stared at the contract again. She thought about her mother, about the way she'd smiled even when the pain was unbearable, about the way she'd told Clara, right before the end, "Don't let this break you." Clara had tried. She'd survived, kept moving, kept breathing. But Ruthie was right. Surviving wasn't enough. She picked up her phone. Her hands were shaking. She dialed before she could talk herself out of it. It rang twice before Adrian answered. "Clara?" His voice was warm, surprised, hopeful. She took a breath. I want to talk about the job. Silence on the other end. Then quietly, okay, when? Tomorrow, if that works. It works. I'll come to you. No. The word came out firm, definite. I'll come to Phoenix. Another pause. Then, okay. I'll text you the address. All right. Clara? Yeah? I'm glad you called. She closed her eyes. Me too. The next day, Clara drove into Phoenix for the second time in 6 years. Her hands were clammy on the steering wheel, her stomach a knot of nerves. She'd told Ruthie she needed the day off, hadn't explained why, and Ruthie had just nodded and said, "About damn time." Adrian's office was downtown, in a sleek glass building that made Clara feel about 2 inches tall. She parked in the visitor lot, sat in her car for 10 minutes trying to convince herself she could do this, and finally forced herself out. The lobby was all marble and polished steel. The woman at the front desk looked like she'd stepped out of a magazine. Clara felt painfully aware of her Target jeans and the coffee stain on her sleeve. "I'm here to see Adrian Vale," she said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. The receptionist smiled. "He's expecting you. 20th floor." Clara took the elevator up, watched the numbers climb, and tried to remember how to breathe. When the doors opened, Adrian was already there, waiting. He looked different in a suit, sharper, more distant, but his expression softened when he saw her. "You came. I said I would." He smiled. "Come on, let's talk in my office." She followed him down a hallway lined with art she didn't recognize and couldn't afford. His office was at the end, corner view, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Clara stopped in the doorway, suddenly overwhelmed. "You okay?" Adrian asked. "This is your life now." It wasn't a question, just an observation, a reminder of how far apart they'd drifted. "Yeah," he said quietly. "It is." She stepped inside, sat down in the chair across from his desk. He didn't sit behind the desk, sat in the chair next to her instead, like he was trying to close the distance. "So," he said, "you want to talk about the job?" Clara nodded. "I need to know this isn't charity." "It's not." "How do I know that?" "Because I don't do charity. I do business, and this is business." She met his eyes. "You're really going to sit there and tell me you'd offer this job to anyone?" "No, I'm offering it to you because I think you'd be good at it. There's a difference." "What if I'm not?" "Then I'll fire you, same as anyone else." The bluntness caught her off guard, but it was also strangely reassuring. "I don't have experience," she said. "You have people skills. You're organized. You're responsible. That's 90% of the job. The rest, I'll teach you. And if I screw up, then you fix it. That's how this works." Clara looked out the window at the city sprawling below. It felt impossible, like a life meant for someone else. But then she thought about Ruthie's words. "You think too small." She thought about her mother. "Don't let this break you." She thought about Adrian sitting on those apartment steps, telling her he was never going to amount to anything. And she thought about the way she'd looked at him and said, "Yes, you will." Maybe it was time to believe that about herself. "Okay," she said quietly. Adrian leaned forward. "Okay, what?" "I'll take the job." His face broke into a smile, genuine, unguarded, and for a second, he looked like the kid she used to know. "Yeah?" "Yeah." She let out a shaky breath. "But I need time. I have to give Ruthie notice, and I need to figure out moving, and—" "2 weeks," Adrian said. Give her 2 weeks. I'll handle the rest." Clara nodded. Then before she could stop herself, she asked, "Why are you doing this?" Adrian's smile faded, replaced by something more serious. "Because you deserve a chance, and because I never forgot what you did for me." She looked away, throat tight. "I didn't do anything." "You did everything." They sat in silence for a moment. Not uncomfortable, just heavy with the weight of years and choices and roads not taken. Finally, Clara stood. "I should go. I've got a long drive back." Adrian stood too, walked her to the elevator. When the doors opened, she stepped inside, turned to face him. "Thank you," she said. "For this. For believing I could do it." "You can." The doors started to close. "Clara?" She caught them, held them open. "Yeah? You're going to be great." She didn't know if she believed him, but for the first time in a long time, she wanted to. The doors closed and Adrian stood there, watching the numbers descend, feeling something he hadn't felt in years. Not satisfaction, not pride, hope. 2 weeks felt like both forever and no time at all. Clara gave her notice to Ruthie the morning after she got back from Phoenix. She'd expected pushback, maybe even anger. But Ruthie just looked at her across the counter, nodded once, and said, "Good. It's about damn time you stopped hiding." "I'm not hiding," Clara had protested weakly. Ruthie had snorted. "Sure you're not." The other waitresses threw her a small party on her last day. Store-bought cake and gas station wine in paper cups. It was sweet in a sad way, and Clara found herself tearing up more than once. These women had been her co-workers for 5 years, but she wouldn't call them friends. They didn't know about her mother or her ex-husband or the night she sat in her apartment wondering if this was all there was. But they'd been kind in their own quiet way, and she'd missed that. When her shift ended, Clara walked out of Ruthie's diner for the last time. She didn't look back. If she did, she wasn't sure she'd be able to leave. The drive to Phoenix with all her belongings felt surreal. Everything she owned fit in her Honda: clothes, books, a few kitchen items, one photo album. Looking at it all crammed in the back seat made her chest tight. 30 years old, and this was it. This was all she had to show for her life. But then she thought about the apartment waiting for her, the job, the chance. Maybe this was a beginning instead of an ending. Adrian had told her to call when she got close, so she did. He answered on the first ring. "Where are you?" "About 20 minutes out." "Good. I'll meet you at Sunset Ridge." "You don't have to." "I want to." She heard the smile in his voice and felt something warm and unfamiliar settle in her chest. When she pulled into the parking lot of Sunset Ridge Apartments, Adrian was already there, leaning against his car with his sleeves rolled up and his tie loosened. He looked more relaxed than she'd ever seen him. He straightened when he saw her, walked over as she parked. "You made it." "I made it." He looked at her car, at the boxes visible through the back window. "That everything?" "Yeah." Something flickered across his face, pity, maybe, or sadness, but he covered it quickly. "Come on, I'll show you the apartment." He led her inside, up to the second floor, and stopped at Unit 2C. He handed her a key. "It's yours." Clara took it, fingers closing around the metal. It felt heavier than it should have. She unlocked the door and stepped inside. The apartment wasn't huge. 1 bedroom, small kitchen, living room with a window that looked out over the courtyard. But it was clean, freshly painted. The floors didn't creak. The appliances looked like they'd been made in this century. There was even a couch and a bed already set up. Clara stood in the middle of the living room, trying to process what she was seeing. "Adrian, I can't afford to furnish. It's included, part of the manager package." She turned to look at him. "This is too much." "It's what you need to do the job." "No, it's—" "Clara." His voice was firm, but not unkind. "Let me do this. Please." She wanted to argue, wanted to tell him she didn't need charity, didn't need him taking care of her like she was something broken that needed fixing. But the truth was, she did need it. And maybe that was okay. "Thank you," she said quietly. Adrian's expression softened. "You're welcome." They stood there for a moment, the silence stretching between them, until Adrian cleared his throat. "So, tomorrow, we start training. I'll be here at 8. We'll go through tenant files, maintenance schedules, lease agreements, all the boring stuff. Okay? You nervous?" "Terrified." He smiled. "Good. Means you care." After Adrian left, Clara spent the rest of the evening unpacking. It didn't take long. She hung her clothes in the closet, put her books on the built-in shelf, set her mother's photo on the nightstand. The apartment still felt empty, but it was hers. That counted for something. She lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, and tried to remember the last time she'd felt this way. Not happy, exactly, but something close to it. Something that tasted like possibility. Sleep didn't come easy. Her mind wouldn't stop racing. What if she screwed this up? What if Adrian realized he'd made a mistake? What if she wasn't cut out for this? But underneath the fear was something else, something that felt dangerously like hope. Adrian showed up at 7:55 the next morning with 2 coffees and a folder thick with paperwork. Clara opened the door still in pajamas, hair pulled back in a messy bun, and immediately felt underdressed. I said 8, Adrian said, handing her a coffee. It's not 8 yet. Close enough. Get dressed. We've got a lot to cover. 20 minutes later, they were sitting at her kitchen table, files spread out between them. Adrian walked her through everything: how to process lease applications, handle maintenance requests, deal with late rent payments. His explanations were clear, patient. He didn't talk down to her or act like any of this should be obvious. What if someone doesn't pay rent? Clara asked, scanning a lease agreement. You send a notice. If they still don't pay after 5 days, you file for eviction. I have to evict people? Sometimes. It's part of the job. Clara's stomach twisted. I don't know if I can do that. Adrian looked at her. Most people pay, but yeah, sometimes you have to make hard calls. That's management. What if I make the wrong call? Then you learn from it. She didn't find that particularly comforting, but she nodded anyway. They spent the next 4 hours going through files. Adrian introduced her to the maintenance crew, 2 guys named Jose and Marcus, who seemed competent and didn't ask too many questions about who she was or why she was there. He showed her the office, a small room on the first floor with a desk, a computer, and a filing cabinet that had seen better days. This is your space, Adrian said. Tenants will come here with issues. You'll handle most of it. If something's too big, you call me. What counts as too big? You'll know. That wasn't helpful either. By the time Adrian left that afternoon, Clara's head was spinning. She sat at the desk, staring at the stack of files, and felt the weight of it all pressing down on her. This was real. She was responsible for 48 units, nearly 100 people, problems she didn't know how to solve. She put her head in her hands and tried not to panic. The first week was rough. Clara woke up every morning with her stomach in knots. She spent hours staring at spreadsheets, trying to make sense of numbers that didn't want to make sense. She fielded calls from tenants complaining about everything from broken air conditioners to noisy neighbors. She smiled and nodded and pretended she knew what she was doing, and then she'd go back to her apartment at night and feel like a fraud. Adrian checked in every day, sometimes in person, sometimes over the phone. He was patient, endlessly patient, but Clara could see the concern in his eyes when she fumbled through explanations or second-guessed decisions. You're doing fine, he kept saying, but she didn't feel fine. She felt like she was drowning. On Friday, a tenant named Mrs. Alvarez came into the office, furious because her toilet had been running for 3 days and no one had fixed it. I put in a request on Tuesday, she said, arms crossed, eyes blazing. It's Friday. Why is my toilet still broken? Clara pulled up the maintenance log, hands shaking slightly. The request was there. Jose was supposed to handle it on Wednesday. I'm so sorry, Mrs. Alvarez. Let me call maintenance right now. You should have called them 3 days ago. You're absolutely right. I apologize. I'll make sure this gets fixed today. Mrs. Alvarez stared at her for a long moment, then sighed. You're new, aren't you? Clara nodded. It's my first week. I can tell. But her expression softened slightly. Just don't let it happen again. I won't. After Mrs. Alvarez left, Clara called Jose. He didn't answer. She called again and again. Finally, on the 4th try, he picked up. Yeah? Jose, it's Clara. Why wasn't Mrs. Alvarez's toilet fixed? A pause. I got busy. Busy with what? Other stuff. Clara's grip tightened on the phone. Jose, when I assign you a job, it needs to get done. I said I got busy. That's not good enough. Silence on the other end. Then, you gonna fire me? Clara froze. She hadn't thought that far ahead. Could she fire him? Should she? No, she said finally, but I need you to fix that toilet today. Understood? Yeah, fine. He hung up. Clara sat there, heart pounding, wondering if she'd just made everything worse. That night, she called Adrian. How do I know if I'm doing this right? She asked without preamble. He was quiet for a moment. What happened? She told him about Mrs. Alvarez, about Jose, about feeling like she had no idea what she was doing. When she finished, Adrian said, You handled it. I didn't handle anything. You confronted Jose. You stood your ground. That's handling it. He didn't take me seriously. He will. Give it time. Clara closed her eyes, leaning back against her couch. What if I can't do this? You can. You keep saying that. Because it's true. She wanted to believe him, but belief felt like a luxury she couldn't afford. The second week was worse. A pipe burst in Unit 3A, flooding the apartment below. Clara spent 6 hours coordinating repairs, dealing with insurance, finding temporary housing for the affected tenant. By the time it was over, she was exhausted and covered in drywall dust. Then there was Mr. Chen in first floor, who was 3 weeks late on rent and kept dodging her calls. She finally caught him in the parking lot, and he'd looked at her with tired eyes and said, "I lost my job. I'm trying. I just need a little more time." Clara had stared at him, seeing her own past reflected back, the desperation, the shame. 2 weeks, she'd said, but after that, I have to follow protocol. He'd nodded, relief flooding his face. Thank you. Thank you so much. After he left, Clara sat in her office and wondered if she'd just made a huge mistake. Adrian had told her to follow the rules. Late rent meant notices, then eviction, no exceptions. But Mr. Chen wasn't a rule. He was a person. She didn't tell Adrian about it, told herself she'd handle it when the time came. The time came faster than she expected. 10 days later, Mr. Chen still hadn't paid. Clara sent the required notice, hands shaking as she slipped it under his door. That night, he knocked on her apartment. "Please," he said when she opened the door. "I have an interview next week. If I can just—" "Mr. Chen, I gave you 2 weeks. It's been almost 4. I know, but if you evict me, I'll have nowhere to go." Clara felt something twist in her chest. She thought about her own eviction, about packing her life into trash bags and sleeping in her car for 3 nights until she found a room to rent. "I'm sorry," she said, and she meant it. "But I don't have a choice." "Yes, you do." "No, I don't." He stared at her, and she saw the moment he realized she wasn't going to change her mind. His face hardened. "You're just like the rest of them." He walked away, and Clara closed the door and stood there feeling sick. She called Adrian. "I had to start eviction on a tenant." "Okay, what's the situation?" She explained about Mr. Chen, about the extensions she'd given him, the promises he'd made. Adrian was quiet for a moment. Then, "You did the right thing." "It doesn't feel right." "It never does. But if you don't enforce the rules, no one will take you seriously." "He's going to be homeless." "That's not your fault." "Feels like it is," Adrian sighed. "Clara, you can't save everyone. I know you want to, but this job, it requires boundaries. You have to protect the property, the other tenants. If you let one person slide, everyone will expect the same." "I know." "Do you?" She didn't answer. "Clara," his voice was gentle now, "you're not responsible for his choices. You gave him time, more than most managers would. He didn't follow through. That's on him." "Okay. You okay?" "Yeah, I'm fine." She wasn't fine, but she'd learned a long time ago that saying you were fine was easier than explaining why you weren't. 3 weeks in, something shifted. Clara woke up one morning and realized she wasn't as scared as she'd been the day before. The paperwork made more sense. The maintenance requests were easier to prioritize. The tenants started recognizing her, greeting her in the courtyard, asking how she was doing. Jose still gave her attitude, but he was getting jobs done faster. Marcus told her she was doing a good job. And coming from him, quiet, stoic Marcus, that meant something. And then there was Mrs. Patel in 2G, an older woman who baked cookies and brought them to the office every Thursday. She'd stopped by that morning with a plate of snickerdoodles and said, "You're much better than the last manager. He never smiled." Clara had smiled then, genuinely, and said, "Thank you." Small victories. But they added up. Adrian came by less frequently now, once or twice a week instead of every day. Clara told herself that was good. It meant he trusted her. But part of her missed having him around, missed the way he explained things without making her feel stupid, missed the quiet confidence he had that maybe, eventually, she'd have too. One afternoon, he showed up unannounced. Clara was in the office, arguing with a supplier over the phone about a delayed appliance delivery. She saw Adrian through the window, waved him in, and held up a finger. "No, I understand you're busy," she said into the phone, voice firm. "But I was promised delivery by Wednesday. It's Friday. I have a tenant without a working refrigerator, and that's not acceptable." "Yes, I'll hold." Adrian leaned against the door frame, arms crossed, a slight smile on his face. Clara covered the phone. What? Nothing. You sounded good just now. I'm yelling at a customer service rep. Yeah, but you're doing it like you mean it. The rep came back on the line and Clara negotiated a delivery for tomorrow morning with a discount for the delay. When she hung up, she felt a small surge of triumph. That was actually kind of fun, she admitted. Adrian laughed. See? You're getting the hang of it. Don't jinx me. He sat down across from her. How are you really doing? Clara considered the question. A month ago, she would have lied. Said she was fine even when she wasn't. But now, it's hard, she said honestly, but I think I'm okay. Yeah? Yeah. She paused. I evicted Mr. Chen last week. Adrian's expression grew serious. How'd that go? Terrible. He called me a heartless bitch on his way out. I'm sorry. Me too. Clara looked down at her hands. But I also know I made the right call. He had options. He didn't take them. That's the hard part of this job. Making decisions that hurt but are still right. I'm starting to see that. They sat in silence for a moment. Comfortable silence. The kind that only happened between people who'd known each other long enough to not need words. You know what? Adrian said finally. I think you're going to be just fine. Clara met his eyes. You've been saying that since the beginning. Yeah, but now I think you're starting to believe it. She didn't answer. But he was right. A month and a half in, Clara had her first real crisis. It was a Tuesday afternoon when Mrs. Alvarez, the same woman who'd yelled at her about the toilet, came into the office, face pale, hands shaking. There's a man in the courtyard, she said. He's screaming, throwing things. I think he's on something. Clara's heart kicked into high gear. Did you call the police? Not yet. I came to get you first. Clara grabbed her phone and followed Mrs. Alvarez outside. Sure enough, there was a man in the courtyard, mid-30s, disheveled, pacing back and forth and shouting at no one. He'd knocked over one of the potted plants and was now kicking at a bench. A few tenants stood in their doorways, watching nervously. Clara approached slowly. Sir, can I help you with something? The man spun around. His eyes were wild, unfocused. Where's Travis? I need to see Travis. I don't know anyone named Travis. Do you live here? No, but Travis does. Unit something. I don't remember. Okay, let me check. I need to see him now. The man's voice rose and he took a step toward her. Clara's instinct screamed at her to back up, to run, but she held her ground. I understand, but I need you to calm down so I can help you. Don't tell me to calm down. He grabbed the bench and flipped it over. The metal scraped loudly against concrete. That's when Clara pulled out her phone and dialed 911. There's a disturbance at Sunset Ridge Apartments, she said, keeping her voice steady even though her hands were shaking. A man is destroying property and threatening residents. The dispatcher asked for details. Clara provided them, eyes never leaving the man. Police are on their way, she said after hanging up. The man stared at her. You called the cops on me? You're scaring people, and you're damaging property. I just need to see Travis. Then wait here calmly, and I'll try to find him. But the man didn't wait. He lunged toward the building, and Clara moved without thinking, stepped in front of him, hands up. Stop. He did. Maybe because she'd surprised him. Maybe because something in her voice cut through whatever haze he was in. Please, Clara said, softer now. Just wait. The police will be here soon, and we'll figure this out. The man's face crumpled. I just need help. I know. The police arrived 5 minutes later. They took the man into custody, gently, after Clara explained the situation. Turned out there was no Travis. The man was having some kind of episode, and he'd wandered into the wrong complex. After they left, Clara stood in the courtyard, adrenaline still buzzing through her veins. Mrs. Alvarez walked over, put a hand on her arm. You handled that well. I was terrified. But you didn't run. That takes guts. Later that night, Clara called Adrian and told him what happened. Jesus, Clara, are you okay? Yeah, I'm fine. You could have been hurt. But I wasn't. He was quiet for a long moment. I'm coming over. Adrian, I'm already in the car. He showed up 20 minutes later with takeout and a bottle of wine. They sat on her couch, eating pad thai straight from the containers, and Clara told him the whole story. When she finished, Adrian shook his head. You shouldn't have gotten in front of him. What else was I supposed to do? Let him go into the building. Let the cops handle it. I couldn't just let him. Yes, you could. Adrian set down his food, turned to face her fully. Clara, I gave you this job because I thought you could handle it. And you can. But part of handling it is knowing when to step back. You don't have to be the hero. I wasn't trying to be a hero. I was just trying to keep people safe. And that's admirable. But you also have to keep yourself safe. Clara looked away. I know. Do you? Yes. She met his eyes again. I'm not stupid, Adrian. I know I took a risk. But it worked out. This time. This time, she agreed. They stared at each other, the tension thick between them. Then Adrian sighed, ran a hand through his hair. I'm sorry. I'm not trying to lecture you. I don't want anything to happen to you. Nothing's going to happen to me. You don't know that. Neither do you. He smiled faintly. Fair point. They finished eating in silence. When the containers were empty and the wine was half gone, Adrian stood to leave. Thanks for coming over, Clara said, walking him to the door. Any time. He paused in the doorway, turned back to look at her. You really are doing great, you know. Even when I'm being reckless? Even then. After he left, Clara sat on her couch, staring at the closed door, and realized something that scared her more than any crisis at the complex. She was starting to depend on Adrian, not just professionally, but in a way that felt dangerous, like he was becoming something more than a boss, more than an old friend. And she didn't know what to do with that. By the end of month 2, Clara had settled into a rhythm. The job still challenged her, still kept her up at night sometimes, but she wasn't drowning anymore. She knew the tenants by name, knew which maintenance issues were urgent and which could wait, knew when to push back and when to let things slide. She'd even started to feel something that resembled pride. One evening, she was locking up the office when she noticed someone sitting on the bench in the courtyard, the same bench that had been flipped during the incident weeks ago. It was a young woman, early 20s, maybe. She looked lost. Clara walked over. Can I help you with something? The woman looked up. Her eyes were red, like she'd been crying. I'm looking for an apartment. Do you have anything available? Clara did. 2 units, actually. Yeah, do you want to see one? The woman nodded. Clara showed her unit 1D, a studio on the first floor. It was small but clean, good natural light. How much is rent? The woman asked. Clara told her. The woman's face fell. I can't afford that. What can you afford? The woman hesitated. I just got out of a bad situation. I'm staying with a friend, but I can't stay there forever. I've got a job, but I'm still catching up on bills. Clara saw herself in that woman, saw the desperation, the shame. Fill out an application, Clara said. I'll see what I can do. The woman's eyes widened. Really? Really. After the woman left, Clara sat in the office and stared at the application. She knew what Adrian would say. No special treatment. Everyone pays the same rate. But this felt different. She called him. I have a situation, she said. What kind of situation? She explained about the woman, about wanting to offer a reduced rate for the first few months to help her get on her feet. Adrian was quiet for a long time. Clara, you know I can't let you do that. I know. It sets a precedent. Other tenants will expect the same. I know. So why are you asking? Clara took a breath. Because I was that woman once, and if someone had given me a break, a real break, it would have changed everything. More silence. Then, how much were you thinking? Clara blinked. What? How much of a discount? I don't know, $200 a month, just for 3 months, until she's stable. Adrian sighed. All right. But it comes out of your discretionary fund, and if she doesn't pay, she's out. No second chances. Deal. And Clara? Yeah? Don't make a habit of this. She smiled. I won't. But as she hung up, she knew she'd just crossed a line. Not a bad one, necessarily, but a line that blurred the rules she was supposed to enforce. And she wasn't sure if that made her a good manager or a terrible one. The woman moved in 2 weeks later. Her name was Sophie, and she cried when Clara handed her the keys. Thank you, Sophie said, voice breaking. You have no idea what this means. Clara did know. That was the problem. That night, She sat in her apartment and thought about everything that had happened in the past 2 months. The mistakes she'd made, the decisions that had kept her up at night, the small victories that felt bigger than they should have. She thought about Mr. Chen, who she'd evicted and who probably hated her. She thought about Sophie, who she'd helped and who might hate her too if things didn't work out. She thought about Adrian, who kept showing up even when he didn't have to. And she thought about herself. About the woman she'd been when she walked into Ruthie's diner every day with no hope of anything better. That woman felt like a stranger now. Clara walked to the mirror, stared at her reflection. She looked different, tired still, but there was something in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Something that looked a lot like strength. Her phone buzzed, a text from Adrian. "How's it going?" She smiled and typed back, "Better than I expected. Good. You earned it." She set the phone down and looked around her apartment, at the furniture that had come with the job, at the photo of her mother on the nightstand, at the life she was building, piece by piece. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't easy, but it was hers. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. 3 months in, Clara stopped checking her phone every 5 minutes, waiting for Adrian to tell her she'd screwed up beyond repair. It happened gradually, the shift from constant anxiety to something closer to confidence. She'd wake up in the morning and the knot in her stomach would be smaller. She'd handle a difficult tenant and afterward, instead of replaying every word she'd said, she'd just move on to the next task. The job was still hard, but it had stopped feeling impossible. Sophie, the young woman Clara had given the discounted rate, was thriving. She'd gotten a promotion at work, paid her rent on time every month, even brought Clara homemade banana bread as a thank you. Clara had been right to take that chance, and knowing that felt better than she wanted to admit, but not everything was working out so cleanly. Jose was still a problem. He did the work, eventually, but always with an attitude that made Clara want to throw something. Last week, he'd shown up 2 hours late to fix a broken water heater, reeking of beer, and when Clara confronted him, he'd shrugged and said, "I got here, didn't I?" She'd written him up, put it in his file. But she hadn't fired him, and part of her wondered if that made her weak. Marcus told her she should have canned him months ago. "He doesn't respect you," Marcus had said, sitting in the maintenance shed with a sandwich and a Coke. "Won't until you show him there's consequences." "I'm trying to be fair." "Fair doesn't mean being a doormat." Clara had bristled at that. "I'm not a doormat." Marcus had just looked at her with those steady eyes and said, "If you say so." Now it was Thursday afternoon, and Clara was in the office doing paperwork when her phone rang. Unknown number. She answered. "Sunset Ridge Apartments, this is Clara." "Ms. Hayes?" A woman's voice, professional, clipped. "This is Patricia Donovan from Vale Properties corporate office." Clara sat up straighter. She'd never spoken to anyone from corporate before. Didn't even know there was a corporate office. "Yes. Hi. What can I do for you?" "Mr. Vale asked me to reach out regarding the quarterly property review. We'll be conducting an inspection of Sunset Ridge next Tuesday. I'm calling to schedule a time." Clara's stomach dropped. "An inspection?" "Standard procedure. We do them every quarter for all properties. Nothing to worry about." Everything about the woman's tone suggested there was plenty to worry about. "What exactly are you inspecting?" "Maintenance records, tenant satisfaction, financial reports, property condition. The usual. We'll need access to all files and a walkthrough of the grounds. Should take about 4 hours. 4 hours of someone combing through every decision she'd made, every call she'd taken, every corner she might have cut." "Okay, what time?" 10 a.m. Does that work?" "Yes, that's fine." "Great. See you then." The woman hung up before Clara could ask any follow-up questions. Clara sat there, staring at her phone, feeling the knot in her stomach return with a vengeance. She called Adrian immediately. "Why didn't you tell me there was an inspection coming?" "Hello to you too." "Adrian, I'm serious." He sighed. "I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to freak out." "Well, I'm freaking out now." "Clara, it's just a standard review. Every property gets them. What if they find something wrong? What if I screwed up the books or missed something in the maintenance logs or—" "You didn't. How do you know?" "Because I've been checking your reports. You're doing fine." That stopped her. "You've been checking my reports?" "Of course I have. You think I'd just throw you into this without oversight?" She didn't know whether to feel relieved or insulted. So you don't trust me? That's not what I said. That's what it sounds like. Clara. His voice was patient, like he was explaining something to a child. I check everyone's reports. It's my job. And yours have been solid. Better than solid, actually. You've brought occupancy up 3%. Maintenance response time is down. Tenant complaints are at an all-time low. You're doing great. Then why do I feel like I'm about to fail a test I didn't study for? Because you care, but trust me, you're going to be fine. Clara wanted to believe him, but the fear sitting in her chest wasn't interested in logic. What if they don't think I'm qualified? What if they recommend replacing me? They won't. But what if they do? Adrian was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was softer. Then I'll tell them no. This is my property, and you're my manager. They don't get to make that call. Something warm spread through Clara's chest. You'd do that? Yeah, I would. Why? Because you've earned it. She closed her eyes. Let that sink in. Okay. Okay? Yeah, okay, I'll stop freaking out. Good. And Clara? Yeah? You really are doing great. I mean it. After they hung up, Clara sat in the quiet office and tried to hold on to that feeling, the warmth of someone believing in her. It had been so long since she'd felt that from anyone other than herself. But the warmth didn't last. By the time Tuesday rolled around, Clara was a wreck. She'd spent the weekend organizing files, double-checking maintenance logs, making sure every single piece of paperwork was in order. She'd walked the property 3 times, picking up trash, checking that all the exterior lights worked, noting anything that might raise a red flag. Monday night, she barely slept. Just lay in bed staring at the ceiling, running through worst-case scenarios. Tuesday morning, she was in the office by 7, even though the inspection wasn't until 10. She made coffee, reviewed the files one more time, changed her shirt twice because she couldn't decide which one looked more professional. At 9:55, a black sedan pulled into the parking lot. Clara watched through the window as Patricia Donovan stepped out, a woman in her 50s with sharp features and an expression that suggested she'd seen every trick in the book and wasn't impressed by any of them. She was followed by a younger man carrying a tablet and a briefcase. Clara took a deep breath, smoothed down her shirt one more time, and went outside to meet them. Ms. Donovan? The woman turned, gave Clara a once-over that felt like an X-ray. Ms. Hayes, this is my associate Brian. Shall we get started? Of course. The office is right this way. For the next 4 hours, Clara felt like she was being dissected. Patricia went through every file with meticulous precision, asked pointed questions about occupancy rates, maintenance schedules, tenant turnover. Wanted to know why Clara had approved a reduced rent for Sophie, why she'd given Mr. Chen multiple extensions before evicting him, why Jose was still employed despite 3 write-ups. Clara answered as honestly as she could, but with every question, she felt her confidence crumbling. You're aware that showing preferential treatment to tenants can open us up to discrimination claims? Patricia asked, peering at Clara over her reading glasses. I wasn't showing preferential treatment. Sophie was in a difficult situation, and I used discretionary funds to help her get stable. It's paying off. She's been a model tenant. That's not the point. The point is consistency. If you offer one tenant a discount, others will expect the same. I understand. It was a one-time decision. Let's hope it stays that way. Brian, the associate, was slightly less intimidating. He focused on the maintenance side, walked the property with Clara, checked the condition of the buildings, inspected the shed where Jose and Marcus kept their tools. Your maintenance response time has improved significantly, he noted, tapping something into his tablet. That's good. Thank you. Though I notice you've got an employee with multiple disciplinary actions still on staff. Clara felt her jaw tighten. Jose does good work when he shows up. I've been trying to work with him. Work with him or avoid confrontation? The question hit like a slap. Excuse me? Brian looked up from his tablet. I'm just saying, sometimes managers avoid making hard calls because they don't want to be the bad guy. But that usually makes things worse in the long run. Clara wanted to argue, but she couldn't. Because he was right. By the time the inspection wrapped up at 2 in the afternoon, Clara felt like she'd been put through a blender. Patricia and Brian returned to the office, where Patricia spent 15 minutes typing notes on her laptop while Clara sat across from her, trying not to fidget. Finally, Patricia looked up. Overall, Ms. Hayes, the property is in acceptable condition. Your record-keeping is thorough, tenant satisfaction is high,
and you've made notable improvements since taking over. Clara felt a flicker of hope. Thank you. However, Patricia's expression didn't change. There are concerns. Of course there were.
Your decision-making shows inconsistency. The discount for Ms. Ramirez, the multiple extensions for Mr. Chen, your reluctance to terminate an underperforming employee, it suggests you're struggling to maintain professional boundaries. I'm trying to balance compassion with responsibility. Compassion is admirable, but this is a business, not a charity. You need to be able to make difficult decisions without letting personal feelings cloud your judgment. Clara's hands clenched in her lap.
I understand.
Do you?
Patricia leaned forward slightly. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're still figuring out whether you want to be a manager or a friend. The words stung because they were true. I'm learning, Clara said quietly.
Patricia studied her for a moment, then nodded. We all are. My recommendation will be that you continue in this position with a follow-up review in 3 months. Use that time to tighten up your decision-making. Be consistent. Be firm when necessary. Can you do that? Yes. Good. Patricia closed her laptop, stood. We'll be in touch. After they left, Clara sat alone in the office, feeling hollowed out. She'd passed, technically. But it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like she'd been told she was barely adequate, and only if she changed everything about how she approached the job. Her phone buzzed, a text from Adrian. How'd it go? Clara stared at the message for a long time before responding. Fine. I'll call you later. She didn't call him later. Instead, she went back to her apartment, changed into sweatpants, and sat on the couch with a glass of wine she didn't really want. She kept replaying Patricia's words. You're still figuring out whether you want to be a manager or a friend. Maybe that was the problem. Maybe Clara wasn't cut out for this after all. Maybe she was too soft, too willing to see people as people instead of entries in a ledger. There was a knock at the door. Clara groaned. She wasn't in the mood for tenant complaints. But when she opened the door, it wasn't a tenant. It was Adrian. He stood there in jeans and a t-shirt, holding a bag from her favorite Thai place, looking at her with an expression that was part concern, part exasperation. You said you'd call. I said I'd call later. It's 8 o'clock. That's later. Clara stepped aside, let him in. I'm fine, Adrian. You don't look fine. Well, I am. He set the food on her kitchen counter, turned to face her. What happened? Nothing happened. The inspection went fine. They said I could keep my job. So why do you look like someone kicked your dog? Clara laughed, short and bitter. Because they basically told me I'm terrible at this. I'm sure that's not what they said. Close enough. She grabbed the wine bottle, refilled her glass. Apparently I'm too inconsistent, too emotional. Can't separate personal feelings from professional decisions. Adrian's jaw tightened. Patricia said that? More or less. And you believe her? She's not wrong. Yes, she is. Clara shook her head. Adrian, I gave a tenant a discount because I felt bad for her. I let Mr. Chen stay way longer than I should have. I haven't fired Jose even though he's been a pain in my ass since day one. She's right. I'm not managing. I'm just trying not to hurt people. Adrian crossed his arms. You know what I think? I'm sure you're about to tell me. I think Patricia Donovan has been doing this job so long, she's forgotten what it's like to actually care about people. Yeah, you gave Sophie a break, and she's thriving because of it. Yeah, you tried to work with Mr. Chen. That didn't pan out, but you gave him a chance. That's not weakness, Clara. That's humanity. Humanity doesn't pay the bills. No, but it makes you a good manager, the kind people actually want to work with. Clara looked away. She said, I need to be more consistent. Then be more consistent, but don't stop caring. How do I do both? Adrian was quiet for a moment. Then he said, You fire Jose. Clara's head whipped around. What? You've given him chances. He hasn't changed. You write him up, he does it again. That's the pattern. So you break it. You let him go. You hire someone who actually shows up on time and doesn't smell like a brewery. That's being consistent and caring about the tenants who need reliable maintenance, caring about Marcus who has to pick up Jose's slack. But no buts. You know I'm right. Clara wanted to argue, but she couldn't because he was right. I've never fired anyone before. I know, but you can do it. What if I can't? Then you'll learn. Adrian stepped closer, his voice gentler now. Clara, you've been doing this job for 3 months. 3 months. You're not supposed to be perfect yet. You're supposed to be learning, making mistakes, figuring out where your boundaries are. Patricia doesn't think I'm learning fast enough. Patricia can think whatever she wants. I'm the one who decides if you keep this job. And you're keeping it.
Clara met his eyes. Why are you so sure about me? Because I've seen what you're capable of, even when you don't see it yourself. They stood there in her small kitchen, the Thai food getting cold on the counter, and Clara felt something shift inside her. Not the fear she'd been carrying around, not the doubt that whispered she wasn't good enough. Something else. Something that felt dangerously like gratitude mixed with something she didn't want to name. Thank you, she said quietly, for believing in me. Always. The word hung between them, heavier than it should have been. Adrian cleared his throat, stepped back. Come on, let's eat before this gets completely inedible. They ate on her couch, talking about everything except the inspection. Adrian told her about a deal he was working on in Scottsdale, about Marcus's daughter, who'd just gotten into college, about the trip he was planning to take once things slowed down. Where are you going? Clara asked. Haven't decided. Maybe somewhere with a beach. Somewhere I can forget about property management for a week. That sounds nice? You should come. The words came out casual, but there was something underneath them that made Clara's heart skip. Adrian? I'm kidding. He smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. Mostly. Clara didn't know what to say to that, so she didn't say anything. When Adrian left an hour later, Clara stood at the door and watched him walk to his car. He turned back once, waved, and she waved back. After he drove away, she leaned against the closed door and wondered when things had gotten so complicated. The next morning, Clara called Jose into the office. He showed up 20 minutes late, which almost made her laugh. Of course he did. What's this about? He asked, slouching in the chair across from her desk. Clara had rehearsed this conversation a dozen times in her head, had written down what she wanted to say, practiced keeping her voice steady, but now, looking at him, all she felt was tired. Jose, this isn't working. He blinked. What? You've been written up 3 times in the past 2 months. You show up late, you don't communicate, and half the time when you do show up, you're not in any condition to work. I always get the jobs done. Eventually, but that's not good enough. The tenants deserve better. Marcus deserves better. And frankly, I deserve better. Jose's expression hardened. So what, you're firing me? Yes. He stared at her like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. You're serious? Completely. This is bullshit. I've been working here for 2 years. And in those 2 years, you've done the bare minimum. I tried to work with you, gave you chances, but you didn't change. So this is it. Jose stood up, anger flashing across his face. You know what? Fine. This place is a dump anyway. And you, he pointed at her, you have no idea what you're doing. You're just some waitress playing manager. The words hit like a punch, but Clara didn't flinch. Maybe I am, but I'm still your boss and you're still fired. You've got until the end of the day to clear out your stuff. Jose glared at her for a long moment, then turned and stormed out, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the window. Clara sat there, hands shaking, heart pounding. She'd done it. She'd actually done it, and it felt awful and empowering at the same time. Marcus came by an hour later. He'd clearly heard. You all right? He asked. Yeah, I think so. Good. That was the right call. He called me a waitress playing manager. Marcus shrugged. He's an asshole. Don't let it get to you. Easier said than done. Yeah, but you'll get there. He paused. You need help finding a replacement? You know anyone? My nephew just got back from trade school. Good kid. Actually shows up on time. Clara smiled. Send me his info. Will do. Marcus turned to leave, then stopped. For what it's worth, you're doing a hell of a lot better than the last guy. Thanks, Marcus. After he left, Clara sat in the quiet office and let herself feel it. The weight of the decision, the fear that she'd made a mistake, the small, stubborn pride that she'd done it anyway. She pulled out her phone, sent a text to Adrian. I fired Jose. His response came fast. How do you feel? Clara thought about it. Terrible. And kind of great. That's how you know you made the right call. She smiled. Thanks for pushing me.
Anytime. Proud of you. Clara set the phone down, leaned back in her chair, and stared at the ceiling. 3 months ago, she'd been a waitress in a diner that smelled like burnt coffee and broken dreams. She'd believed her life was small, and it always would be. Now she was here, managing a property, making hard calls, figuring out who she was when the world stopped telling her she couldn't be more. It was terrifying, it was exhausting, but it was also hers. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Clara felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Over the next few weeks, things started to smooth out. Marcus's nephew, Danny, turned out to be everything Jose wasn't: reliable, polite, actually sober when he showed up for work. Tenant complaints dropped. Maintenance requests got handled faster. The property felt like it was running the way it was supposed to. Clara still had hard days, still made mistakes, still lay awake sometimes wondering if she was good enough. But the voice that said she wasn't got quieter every day. And the voice that said she was, that small, stubborn voice that sounded a lot like her mother, a lot like Adrian, and increasingly like herself, got louder. One Friday evening, Clara was locking up the office when her phone rang. Adrian. "Hey," she answered. "You busy? Just finished for the day? Why?" "Come to dinner with me." Clara paused. "Like, work dinner?" "No, just dinner. As friends." "Friends, right. Okay, where?" "I'll pick you up in 20 minutes. He took her to a small Italian place downtown. Nothing fancy, just good food and low lighting. They sat in a corner booth, and for the first time since Clara had started working for him, they didn't talk about the property at all. They talked about everything else. About books they'd read, movies they'd seen, places they wanted to travel, about stupid things from when they were kids, the time Adrian tried to fix his neighbor's bike and ended up making it worse, the time Clara got detention for arguing with a teacher about the Civil War. They laughed, actually laughed, and Clara realized how long it had been since she'd done that. "You seem different," Adrian said at one point, watching her over his wine glass. "Different how?" "Lighter. Like something that was weighing you down isn't anymore." Clara thought about that. "I think I finally stopped waiting for everything to fall apart." "That's good." "Yeah, it is." They were quiet for a moment. Then Adrian said, "You know, I meant what I said before, about being proud of you." "I know. I don't think you do." "Clara, when I walked into that diner and saw you," he paused, searching for words, "I saw someone who'd given up. And now, 3 months later, you're not that person anymore. You fought for this. You earned it. That's not nothing." Clara felt her throat tighten. "It's because you gave me the chance." "No, I gave you the opportunity. You did the rest." She looked down at her plate, trying to hold back the tears that were suddenly threatening. "Why did you really do this, Adrian? And don't say it's because you owed me. We both know that's not the whole truth." He was quiet for a long time. When she finally looked up, he was staring at his hands, jaw tight. "Because I couldn't stand the thought of you wasting away in that place," he said finally. "Because you deserved better. And because—" He met her eyes. "Because I never stopped caring about you, even after all these years." Clara's breath caught. "Adrian, I'm not saying that to make things weird. I wanted you to know that this wasn't charity. It wasn't pity. It was me trying to give back to someone who mattered, who still matters." She didn't know what to say, didn't know how to process the rush of emotions flooding through her. "You matter too," she said quietly, "more than you probably realize." They sat there in that corner booth, the restaurant buzzing around them, and something unspoken passed between them. It wasn't a declaration, wasn't a promise, but it was real. And for now, that was enough. When Adrian dropped her off that night, he walked her to her door like he had a dozen times before. But this time, when she turned to say goodnight, he was closer than usual. "Thank you for tonight," Clara said. "Thank you for saying yes." They stood there, the space between them charged with something neither of them seemed ready to name. Finally, Adrian stepped back. "Good night, Clara." "Good night." She watched him walk away, then went inside and leaned against the door, heart racing. She was falling for him. Had been for a while, probably. Maybe since that first day in the diner when he'd looked at her like she was still worth saving. And that terrified her more than any inspection ever could, because if she let herself hope, really hope, and it didn't work out, She wasn't sure she'd survive it. But as she got ready for bed that night, Clara realized something. She was tired of being afraid, tired of playing it safe, tired of living like the world was going to take everything from her if she dared to want more. She'd spent 3 months learning how to be a manager. Maybe it was time to learn how to let herself be happy.
The realization that she was falling for Adrian should have made things simpler. It didn't. Instead, Clara spent the next 2 weeks second-guessing every interaction they had. When he texted her about work stuff, she wondered if there was subtext. When he stopped by the property, she analyzed the way he looked at her, the way he smiled, whether he stood a little closer than necessary. It was exhausting. And worse, it was distracting her from the job.
She caught herself staring at her phone during a tenant meeting, waiting for Adrian to respond to a message she'd sent an hour ago. She rewrote emails to him 3 times before sending them, trying to strike the right balance between professional and friendly. She started wearing makeup to work, not a lot, just enough, and hated herself a little for it. This was exactly what she'd been afraid of, letting feelings complicate something that was already complicated enough. Marcus noticed first. "You okay?" he asked one afternoon when Clara had been staring at the same invoice for 10 minutes without actually reading it.
"Yeah, fine. Why?"
He gave her a look that said he didn't believe her but wasn't going to push. "No reason, just seemed distracted lately." "I'm not distracted." "Sure." After he left, Clara put her head in her hands and groaned. She needed to get it together. The 3-month follow-up review was coming in 2 weeks, and if Patricia showed up and found Clara mooning over her boss like a teenager, that would be the end of everything. So she made a decision. She was going to focus, do her job, keep things professional with Adrian, no matter how hard that was. It lasted exactly 4 days. On Thursday evening, Claire was doing a final walkthrough of the property before heading home when she noticed Adrian's car in the parking lot. He wasn't supposed to be here. He hadn't mentioned stopping by. She found him in the courtyard, sitting on the same bench where they'd talked that first night months ago. He looked tired, shoulders slumped, tie loosened, the kind of tired that came from carrying too much for too long. Clara hesitated. She could turn around, pretend she hadn't seen him, go home and maintain the distance she'd been trying so hard to keep. But she didn't. She walked over and sat down beside him. "Rough day?" Adrian looked up, surprised. Then he smiled, small and genuine. "Something like that." "You want to talk about it?" "Not really." "Okay." They sat in silence for a while. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. It was the kind of evening that felt almost too beautiful, like the world was trying to make up for something. Finally, Adrian spoke. "My daughter called today." Clara turned to look at him. In all the months she'd known him again, he'd never mentioned having a daughter. Never mentioned being a father at all. "I didn't know you had a daughter." "Yeah, Emma, she's 6.
His voice was soft, weighted. "Her mom and it didn't work out. I see Emma every other weekend, but it's not enough. It's never enough." "That must be hard." "It is. Today she asked me why I don't live with her anymore, and I didn't know what to say. How do you explain to a 6-year-old that sometimes people can't make it work, even when they love each other?" Clara thought about her own father, who'd left when she was 12. Thought about the years she'd spent wondering if it was her fault, if she'd done something wrong. "You tell her the truth," Clara said quietly, "that it's not her fault, that you love her. That's all kids really need to hear." Adrian looked at her. "Is that what you needed to hear?" "Yeah, but I never got it. I'm sorry." "Don't be. It made me who I am." She paused. "For better or worse?" Adrian shook his head. "Definitely for better." They were quiet again. Then Adrian said, "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "That night at dinner, when I said you still mattered to me." He stopped, searching for words. "Did I make things weird?" Clara's heart kicked up. "No, you didn't." "You sure? Because you've been different since then, more distant." She couldn't lie to him, didn't want to. "I've been trying to keep things professional." "Why?" "Because you're my boss, Adrian, and because I don't want to screw this up." "Screw what up? The job?" "Everything." Adrian turned to face her fully. "Clara, what are we talking about here?" She took a breath. This was it. The moment where she either said what she was feeling or buried it forever. "I'm talking about the fact that I think about you way more than I should.
That every time you text me, my heart does this stupid thing where it speeds up. That when you look at me sometimes, I forget how to breathe." She laughed, shaky and embarrassed. "I'm talking about the fact that I'm falling for you, and it scares the hell out of me." Adrian stared at her. For a long moment, he didn't say anything, and Clara felt panic rising in her chest. Then he smiled, really smiled, and said, "Thank God." "What?" "I've been losing my mind trying to figure out if you felt the same way." Clara blinked. Wait, you feel the same way?" "Clara, I've been half in love with you since I walked into that diner and saw you again. Why do you think I offered you this job? You said it was because I deserved a chance. It was. But it was also because I couldn't stand the thought of walking away from you twice." She didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "So what does this mean?" Adrian reached for her hand, laced his fingers through hers. "I don't know, but I'd like to find out. If you want to." "Adrian, this is complicated. You're my boss. People are going to talk. Let them. And what if it doesn't work out? What happens to my job?" "Your job is yours, no matter what happens between us. I promise you that." Clara looked down at their joined hands. This was a risk, a huge one. But staying safe hadn't gotten her anywhere. Playing small hadn't protected her from getting hurt. Maybe it was time to stop being afraid. "Okay," she said. "Okay? Yeah, let's find out." Adrian's smile was bright enough to light up the darkening sky. He leaned in, and Clara met him halfway, and when their lips touched, it felt like coming home. The next morning, Clara woke up with her phone buzzing on the nightstand. She grabbed it, still half asleep, and saw a text from Sophie. "Can you come to 1D? There's a problem." Clara was out of bed and dressed in 5 minutes. She knocked on Sophie's door, and the young woman opened it immediately, looking frazzled. "I'm so sorry to bother you this early, but—" Sophie gestured inside. "The ceiling's leaking. There's water everywhere." Clara stepped in and saw the damage. Water was dripping steadily from a crack in the ceiling above the kitchen, pooling on the floor. Sophie had put down towels, but they were already soaked through. "Okay, don't panic. I'll call maintenance." Danny answered on the first ring, thank God, and said he'd be there in 15 minutes. Clara stayed with Sophie, helping her move things away from the leak, reassuring her that it would be fixed. "I'm really sorry," Sophie kept saying. "I know you've already done so much for me." "Sophie, this isn't your fault. Pipes burst. It happens." Danny showed up and got to work. The problem was in the unit above. Mr. Hassan in 2D had a pipe corrode and burst overnight. By the time they got it under control, both apartments had water damage. Clara spent the rest of the morning coordinating repairs, dealing with insurance, finding temporary housing for both tenants. It was chaos, but she handled it, didn't panic, didn't fall apart, just did what needed to be done. By noon, she was exhausted but satisfied. She dealt with the crisis and come out the other side. Marcus found her in the office, reviewing damage assessments. "You did good today," he said. "Thanks. It was a mess." "Yeah, but you handled it. That's what matters." After he left, Clara sat back in her chair and realized something. 6 months ago, a crisis like this would have sent her spiraling. She would have been convinced she was going to lose her job, that she'd screwed everything up beyond repair. Now, she'd just handled it and moved on. That was growth. Real, tangible growth. Her phone buzzed. "Adrian. Heard about the leak. You okay?" "Yeah, all under control. That's my girl." Clara smiled at the screen, warmth spreading through her chest. The 3-month follow-up review came faster than Clara wanted it to. Patricia Donovan showed up on a Tuesday morning, same sharp expression, same meticulous scrutiny. But this time Clara wasn't terrified. She was ready. The inspection took 3 hours. Patricia went through the files, walked the property, interviewed tenants. Clara answered every question calmly, provided documentation for every decision, explained her reasoning without second-guessing herself. When it was over, Patricia sat across from Clara in the office and said, "You've improved." "Thank you." "The property is running smoothly. Tenant satisfaction is up. Maintenance response times are excellent. You've addressed the concerns from the last review." Clara waited for the other shoe to drop. "However," Patricia continued, "I notice you've started a relationship with Mr. Vale." Clara's stomach dropped. "How did you—" "It's my job to notice things. And it's written all over both of you. It's not affecting my work. I can see that. Your performance has actually improved, but you need to be aware of the optics. Dating your boss can complicate things. I understand. Patricia studied her for a moment. Do you love him? The question caught Clara off guard. Yes, I think I do. And does he love you? I don't know. We haven't talked about it. Then talk about it. Because if this is serious, you two need to figure out how to navigate it professionally. If it's not serious, you need to end it before it becomes a problem. Clara nodded. I will. Good. Patricia closed her laptop. My recommendation is that you continue in this position. You've proven yourself capable. Just keep your personal and professional lives separate as much as possible. I will. Thank you. After Patricia left, Clara sat in the quiet office and processed what had just happened. She'd passed. Again. And this time, it felt real. That night, Clara met Adrian at his place, a sleek penthouse downtown that still felt too big and too empty. They sat on his couch with takeout from the Thai place, and Clara told him about the review. She knows about us, Clara said. Adrian paused mid-bite. And she said, as long as it doesn't affect my work, it's fine. But we need to be careful.
Okay, we can do that. Clara set down her food, turned to face him. Adrian, what are we doing? What do you mean? I mean, are we just having fun, or is this something real? Adrian set his food down too. Do you want it to be real? I asked you first. He smiled. Clara, I'm a single father with more money than I know what to do with and a job that consumes my life. I don't have time for anything that isn't real. So yeah, this is real, at least for me. For me too. Good. They sat there looking at each other, and Clara felt something settle in her chest. This was real. They were doing this. So what happens now? She asked. Now we figure it out. One day at a time. That's simple? That's simple. Clara leaned in, kissed him. Okay. The months that followed weren't perfect. Nothing ever was. There were hard days at work. Tenants who didn't pay. Maintenance issues that seemed to multiply overnight. Decisions that kept Clara up at night wondering if she'd made the right call. There were hard days with Adrian. Schedules that didn't align. Moments when Clara felt the weight of their different worlds. Fights that started small and spiraled before they figured out how to talk through them. But there were good days too. Days when Clara walked the property and felt genuine pride at what she'd built. Days when tenants thanked her for her help, when Marcus told her she was doing a hell of a job, when Danny showed up early and got work done without being asked. Days when Adrian showed up at her door with dinner and a smile, when they spent evenings talking about nothing and everything, when his daughter Emma came for the weekend and Clara got to see him as a father, patient and loving and trying his best. 6 months into the job, Clara got a call from Ruthie. Heard you're doing well for yourself, Ruthie said without preamble. I'm trying. Good. You always were too stubborn to fail. Clara smiled. Thanks, I think. I mean it. You've got grit, kid. Just took you a while to figure that out. After they hung up, Clara thought about the woman she'd been when she worked at that diner. The one who believed her life was small and always would be. That woman felt like a stranger now. 9 months in, Adrian's ex-wife called. There was a problem with Emma's school, and she needed Adrian to step in. He was stressed, snapping at everyone, barely sleeping. Clara found him at his office one night, staring at his computer screen without really seeing it. Come home, she said from the doorway. I can't. I have to finish this. Adrian, come home. He looked at her and she saw the exhaustion in his eyes. I don't know how to fix this, he said quietly. You don't have to fix everything. Sometimes you just have to show up. He stood, grabbed his jacket, and they left together. At his place, Clara made him sit on the couch and actually eat something while she listened to him talk about Emma, about the guilt he carried for not being there enough, about feeling like he was failing her. You're not failing her, Clara said when he finished. You're doing your best. That's all anyone can do. It doesn't feel like enough. It never does. But that doesn't mean it isn't. Adrian looked at her, and something shifted in his expression. How did I get so lucky to have you? I ask myself the same thing about you. He pulled her close, and they sat there in the quiet, holding each other, and Clara realized something. This was what love looked like. Not perfect, not easy. Just two people showing up for each other, again and again, even when it was hard. A year after Clara started working at Sunset Ridge,
Adrian asked her to move in with him. They were at her apartment, which had become more hers over the months, filled with books and plants and evidence of a life being lived, when he said it. "I know it's fast," he said, "and I know you like your independence, but I hate going home to an empty place when I could be going home to you." Clara's first instinct was to say no, to protect herself, to keep some piece of her life separate just in case. But then she thought about everything she'd learned over the past year, about taking risks, about letting herself want more. "Okay," she said. "Yeah?" "Yeah." Adrian's smile was worth every ounce of fear she felt. Moving in together was an adjustment. Adrian's place was too clean, too perfect. Clara's mess drove him crazy at first. Books left open on the couch, coffee cups on every surface, clothes draped over chairs. But they figured it out, made compromises, created a space that felt like both of them. And when Emma came for weekends, Clara learned how to be part of that too. It wasn't always smooth. Emma was 6 and confused about why this new woman was suddenly around. But slowly, carefully, they built something. One Sunday morning, Emma was making pancakes with Adrian while Clara set the table. Emma looked over and said, "Clara, do you like living with us?" Clara's heart squeezed. "Yeah, sweetie, I do." "Good, because I like when you're here." It was such a small thing, but it felt enormous. 18 months in, Clara was offered a promotion. Adrian wanted her to oversee 3 of his properties instead of just 1. More responsibility, more money, more everything. She said yes without hesitation. The shy waitress who'd been afraid to try was gone. In her place was a woman who knew what she was capable of, who'd learned to trust herself, who'd stopped waiting for permission to want more. 2 years after that first night in the diner, Adrian took Clara back to Yuma. She didn't know why at first. He just said he wanted to show her something. They drove out to the diner. Ruthie's was still standing, still serving burnt coffee and pie that tasted like nostalgia. Ruthie was there, older and grayer, but just as sharp. "Well, look who it is," Ruthie said when they walked in. "The girl who finally got out." Clara hugged her. "Thanks to you." "Bullshit, you did that yourself." After they ate mediocre burgers and fries that somehow tasted exactly right, Adrian drove Clara out to the highway where his tire had blown all those years ago. He pulled over at the exact spot. "Why are we here?" Clara asked. Adrian turned to her, and there was something in his eyes she'd never seen before. Something that looked like fear mixed with hope. "Because this is where everything changed, for both of us." "Adrian!" He got out of the car, and Clara followed. They stood on the side of the road, desert stretching out in every direction, and Adrian took her hand. "Clara Hayes, you saved me twice. Once when we were kids and I didn't believe in myself, and once when you walked into my life again and reminded me what it means to actually care about someone." Clara's breath caught. "What are you doing?" "I'm asking you to marry me." He pulled a ring from his pocket. Simple, elegant, perfect. Clara stared at it, at him, at the road that had brought them here. "We barely survived being apart," Adrian continued. "I don't want to do that again. I want to build a life with you. A real one, messy and complicated and beautiful. What do you say?" Clara thought about the woman she'd been, the one who believed she didn't deserve good things, the one who played small because it felt safer. She thought about the woman she'd become, the one who'd learned to take up space, to make hard decisions, to believe she was worth more. And she thought about Adrian, about the boy who'd sat next to her on apartment steps dreaming of something bigger, about the man who'd walked back into her life and refused to let her settle for less than she deserved. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'll marry you." Adrian's smile was brighter than the desert sun. He slipped the ring on her finger, pulled her close, and kissed her like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. And maybe, in that moment, she was. The wedding was small. Just close friends, Marcus and Danny from the property, Ruthie who flew out from Yuma and complained about everything but cried during the vows, Emma in a flower girl dress who took her job very seriously. Clara wore a simple dress and carried wildflowers, and when Adrian saw her walking toward him, his eyes went bright with tears. They got married in the courtyard at Sunset Ridge, the place where Clara had learned what she was capable of, where she'd built something real. During the reception, Marcus raised his glass and said, "To Clara, who went from not knowing how to evict a tenant to running 3 properties like a boss. We're all proud as hell. Everyone cheered. Clara felt her throat tighten with emotion. Later, when the party was winding down and Emma was asleep on the couch, Adrian found Clara standing in the courtyard alone. "You okay?" he asked. "Yeah, just thinking." "About what?" She looked around at the property, at the lights strung up for the wedding, at the life she'd built here. "About how different things are. How if your tire hadn't blown that day, I'd probably still be at that diner."
"You would have gotten out eventually." "Maybe. But I don't think I would have believed I deserved to." Adrian wrapped his arms around her. "And now? Now I know better." They stood there in the quiet, holding each other, and Clara thought about everything that had led them here. The pain and the loss and the years of believing she was stuck. The moment Adrian walked back into her life, the terrifying leap of saying yes to something she didn't know if she could do. None of it had been easy. None of it had been perfect. But it had been worth it. Because the truth was, people didn't save you. They just reminded you that you'd always had the strength to save yourself. Adrian had given her a chance, but she'd done the rest, and that made all the difference. 5 years later, Clara stood in her office, not at Sunset Ridge anymore, but at Vail Properties headquarters, where she now served as Director of Property Management, overseeing 15 locations, and looked at the photo on her desk. It was from their wedding day. Her and Adrian, hands joined, smiling like they'd just discovered something precious. Beside it was a photo of Emma, now 11, holding a trophy from her soccer team, and another of Clara's management team, good people she'd hired and trained, people who reminded her of herself when she was just starting out. Her phone buzzed. A text from Sophie, who now managed Sunset Ridge and was doing a damn good job of it. "Quick question about a difficult tenant. Got a minute?" Clara smiled and called her back. They talked through the situation, and Clara heard echoes of herself in Sophie's voice. The uncertainty. The fear of making the wrong call. "Trust your gut," Clara told her. "You know what you're doing." "What if I don't?" "Then you'll figure it out. That's the job." After they hung up, Clara looked out the window at Phoenix sprawling below. This city had become home. This life had become hers. She thought about the shy waitress in the diner who'd stopped believing in herself, who'd thought her story was over before it really began. That woman would barely recognize who Clara had become, and that was exactly how it should be. Because sometimes the most important thing you can give someone isn't success or money or even opportunity. It's the reminder that they were always capable of more than they believed. Adrian had given her that, and now, every day, Clara tried to give it to someone else. She picked up her phone and sent a text to Adrian, who was at home with Emma. "Love you. Be home soon." His response came fast. "Love you too. We're making dinner. Emma insists on trying to make that pasta thing you like. Fair warning, the kitchen's a disaster." Clara laughed. "Can't wait." She grabbed her things, turned off the lights, and headed home. To the family she'd found, to the life she'd built, to the woman she'd become. It hadn't been a straight line. It hadn't been easy. But it had been hers. And in the end, that was all that mattered.